When I found out I was going to be a parent, I immediately felt a lot of anxiety and worry. So I went on to BetterHelp to try to look for a therapist to help me with that.
My relationship with my family and with my boyfriend and with myself were suffering. I really needed help.
I was ruminating a lot. Really getting those thoughts out to a therapist and getting feedback was just life-changing.
Discover what BetterHelp Online Therapy can do for you. Visit BetterHelp.com today.
I loathe the process of bottling beer, and I have no qualms admitting that. When I switched over to kegging, it changed my world. I mean, I could spend 10 minutes doing what had previously taken me nearly an hour, and the beer would be carbonated in just a few days to boot. Of course, having beer on tap posed an issue when it came to sharing it with other people, especially when they weren't at my house, and also when those people happened to be judges in a competition that I was submitting my beer to. This ultimately led me to researching various methods for getting beer from a keg into a bottle, and a couple specific products seem to get most of the focus. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week I'm joined by contributor Jordan Folks to discuss these products, namely the Blichmann BeerGun and the Tapcooler counter-pressure bottle filler.
They say that homebrew competitions and pro brew competitions, for that matter, are largely a packaging competition. And I really have found that to be true, because if you just put a bottle next to your tap and open it up and try to cap on foam, I mean, you're going to get so much oxygen in there. And these devices that they've made are really helpful in both the process, but also the ultimate quality of the bottle that you present to judges or your friends. And so they're really handy tools to have around the house. But, there's differences in cost and also differences in ease of use. And so I thought it was important to put it to the test and see, does the resulting bottled beer actually taste any different?
Yeah, I love that saying that competitions really are more a function of packaging than they are the beer. I mean, that's obviously kind of tongue in cheek, but we're going to get into the finer details of both of these products in a bit. But I will say that I've got quite a bit of experience using both of them. And overall, I really appreciate how simple they make the process of bottling off of kegs. Like you said, Jordan, it's a convenience factor thing. But is one objectively better than the other, or do they do essentially the same thing? This is going to be a good one. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for supporting our efforts, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique perks from YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor. Among other things, you can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of our show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we would appreciate that, as well as it makes it easier for those who have yet to hear of us to find the show. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who offer brewers various options for high-quality, reasonably priced electric brewing rigs in various voltages and sizes, including their new 120-volt 10-gallon all-in-one system, which is really cool. Clawhammer Supply really does put the effort into ensuring their systems do exactly as they're intended to do in as efficient a way as possible. And if you're not ready to make the jump to electric just yet, they also sell brew-in-a-bag homebrewing starter kits, as well as ingredient kits, gear, and pretty much everything else you need to make a batch of delicious beer. Do yourself a favor and visit clawhammersupply.com. We're confident you're going to love their stuff just as much as we do. And a little sidebar here, Martin Keene of Brülosophy is going to be partnering up with Kyle from Clawhammer Supply for a really neat session at this year's HomebrewCon. So if you happen to be going to HomebrewCon in Asheville, North Carolina, don't miss that session. All right, listener and patron Ricky Alexander wrote in with feedback on some comments we made in our episode about hoppy lagers regarding brewing and climate change. He said, "Great content as always. However, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony of acknowledging that global climate change is an important issue that should be considered when brewing, juxtapositioned against the use of an AI chatbot to develop your style guidelines. On one hand, brewers might take steps to buy locally and conserve water as best as they can manage. On the other, AI uses thousands of gallons of water to generate those write-ups. As you said, you are all going to do what we're going to do. we're all going to do what we're going to do, but just thought it was worth pointing out. Interesting that you agreed with ChatGPT. It is almost like y'all read the same articles. Is that confirmation bias? Anyway, I'm not throwing shade, just pointing out the elephant I saw in the corner. I think what he means by the interesting that we agreed is that, these chatbots learn your style and kind of feed you what it is they know that, you're looking for on some level. I'm not sure how true that is, but that's my guess. What do you say, Jordan?
Yeah, I'm kind of anti-AI myself, and I really don't like using it in any sort of like artistic productions.
Yes.
I think let's leave it to the real artists, the real musicians, the real painters, what have you. But unfortunately, even Google is giving you AI results now, so it's kind of challenging to avoid. But me personally, I'm not like using AI to like write me a to-do list for a vacation or anything like that. And so I can appreciate the criticism, and I do agree that let's get back to using our human brains and maybe less water in the process.
So check it out. I've got a bunch of points that I wrote down on this. This has been an issue that I've talked about on so many fronts, whether it's my job as a psychologist and talking about the integration of AI in mental health, my other hobby of writing music and being an artist on that level, and the hatred that I have for these people. I saw an ad just this morning for a company called Suno that you can plug any idea in and it creates a full, very AI sounding, but still quote studio produced song based on a little prompt that you give it. And the person in the ad says, "This is still my music. I created it. AI just helped." No, that's bullshit. AI made it for you. You fed it something, that was 2 seconds long. So I'm with you and have issues on that. Now, I not only expected this comment, the one that Ricky left after publishing that episode, because I thought it while we were recording that episode, but I thought we would get way more comments like that way sooner than we did. The fact is, while I'm sure Ricky wasn't the only one who had the thought, he was the only one who's reached out to us so far. Now, I am by no means, I'm with you, Jordan, by no means a lover of AI, especially as an artist who enjoys creating my own music. And as, a clinician who sees value in that human component of being with other people. I have major concerns with people leaning on AI for stuff like that. To me, it kind of defeats the purpose of personal expression in art, especially if like in music, the lyrics were written by a real person, and then like just learn to play an instrument, whatever. I'm like, figure it out, dude. I mean, that's what the whole idea of being an artist is, or find a band. Now, I'm pretty hardcore on that. That said, I'd be lying if I said there aren't areas where I find AI to be pretty freaking helpful. I'm going to give an example here. And it's an interesting one because I was struggling like morally with this as I was using AI. And I had to accept it's just way too helpful. I was having issues with my pool pump a couple weeks ago. This pool pump is like 20 years old, man. Finding anything online or on YouTube, it was helpful, but I just couldn't get enough. And so I took a couple pictures of my pump. That's all it took. I loaded it into Claude and it spit out an entire to-do in terms of, oh, this is what you're looking to do. Press this many times, do this, do that. Within 10 minutes, my entire issue that I'd been struggling with for a year and a half was completely fixed. My pool looks better than it's ever looked. The pump is working beautifully. My energy use is down. All of these things. I look at that and I'm like, wow, that was hella helpful. And I get that there are people out there who are paid to come over and press all those buttons for me. I don't know what to say about that. I really appreciated, getting the help that I did from AI on that. Now, the whole thing with the water usage, I have heard this before. My wife has brought it up to me because she's read about it as well. And while I initially accepted all of the claims as true, Ricky's feedback led me down an investigative rabbit hole that I spent way too long on. And here's the thing. I don't know how much of what I ended up finding was generated by AI. They make it impossible these days to decipher all of that. So I'm not going to sit here and act like some AI expert. This is based purely on the research that I could find online. But there were some consistencies that I discovered that seemed to indicate a pretty massive level of misunderstanding. For example, Ricky said that AI used thousands of gallons of water to generate the various descriptions of hoppy lagers that you and I talked about on that episode, Jordan, when the reality is each of those specific prompts used maybe or relied on, maybe 5 drops, like a half a teaspoon or so of water. Now, when accounting for all of the other aspects of AI, like the water used to generate the the electricity to keep the servers on. That volume absolutely jumps up. And from what I could find, it jumps up to about 15 milliliters of water or so. That's not a tiny amount. I'm not trying to minimize the issue. When you take the millions of prompts, the millions of people who are doing it all at the same exact time, 24 hours a day, that is a shit ton of water. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. But here's the thing. Water is used for almost everything in the modern world. All the servers that have been running the internet for as long as we've been on it, that's water. If you're going to Taco Bell and buying a Crunchwrap Supreme, they're keeping their lights on using the same energy that these AI companies, and I'm not trying to side with AI on this. If you're streaming The Flaming Lips on Spotify, that's using energy that is relying on water to keep servers cool and to power those servers on. All of these things, us recording this over Microsoft Teams, we are utilizing some level of water to generate the ability to do this. So, I get the concern about water conservation. I'm hardcore about that stuff, but I also don't want to delude myself and I hate to use this pun, but like swim in an ocean of pretending that I know more than I do, when the reality, and ignoring all of the other things that I do in my life, which is pretty much everything, that also quote wastes water. So one other thing that I learned while researching this is that all major AI companies are actively developing ways, and I say major, to cool their servers more efficiently, including like closed loop systems, using non-potable water, and reclaiming water for additional use. I'll be completely honest. I'm one of the few, probably millions of people who deleted ChatGPT because of their political stuff. Like I'm not up with that. Anthropic is the one who turned down the Department of Defense, money. And so I'm like, all right, cool. I'll try Claude, all of that to say, Ricky, I share your concern. And even for those who are adamantly against AI, I'm just not sure they're going to be able to avoid it for very long, as hard as they might try. It's just become so integrated into pretty much everything at this point. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I'd trust somebody who said they haven't intentionally used and benefited from AI for something at this point. Even if you don't know it, I feel like most people have probably leaned on it on purpose, and they're like, "Oh, that was pretty cool," So anyway, I suppose only time is going to tell what the real impact of this is going to end up being, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Did you have any final points on AI, Jordan?
So I've actually been involved in research in my day job around sustainability as it relates to AI and the grid. And I don't know that much about the water situation, but it is a major concern for the electric grid in the US. Yeah. And so that's a whole nother hour episode getting into all of that, but just rest assured, there's an entire, cottage industry of people that are working on this issue and trying to make sure that the new AI data center needs, which are inevitable, as much as we might not like them, at least we have people that are trying to make sure that they're powered by renewable energy and better utilizing the existing grid via a variety of really novel sustainability solutions, with the goal of not driving up the price of electricity for the standard residential ratepayer. So the concerns around AI and the grid are totally valid, but just rest assured, there are people that are working on, trying to make it better. And so, there's a lot of work in front of us, but I'm confident that our industry on the sustainability side with the grid can really make it a lot more palatable than it would be if we weren't involved.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose I'll just finish with screw Kevin O'Leary. I'd be with all the people who are fighting to keep his bullshit out of Utah. So, all right, if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Be sure to grab your Brülosophy merch over at brülosophy.com/shop. We're offering more options than we ever have before, like t-shirts, hoodies, and hats, fanny packs, shorts, coffee mugs, and so much more. Prices are quite reasonable, and international shipping is available. Again, brülosophy.com/shop. You can click one of the product images on that page. That will redirect you to our Dashery store, or you can go straight there, brülosophy.dashery.com. We've also put a link in the description of this episode. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. For many homebrewers, one of the best parts of making their own beer is sharing it with others. I am certainly in this camp, and when I switched from bottling to kegging, I had to figure out the best way to package beer from kegs so that I could take it with me to places that aren't my house, basically. Thankfully, some clever folks out there have come up with methods for doing so that work pretty well. But before we get into the specifics of the products that have been designed and sold to do this, let's talk more generally about considerations when it comes to packaging beer.
Well, in my opinion, one thing that you really want to focus on is minimizing oxidation. And so whether you're using a bottle, a keg, there's a lot of different variety of approaches that we can talk about in order to minimize those. But obviously you want to be clean as well, right? Sanitize everything. Maybe, don't be blowing a bunch of dust around or something while you're doing it. And ultimately, if we can get a clean, oxygen minimized product into the package, we're really looking for consistency, right? So if you're bottling, try to get the same level of sugar into all the bottles. That's why some might argue that forced carbonation is a lot easier. Although I will admit the first time I tried to force carb a keg, it was over carbed. And I think that we've kind of moved away from the shake it and wait kind of approach. And so I think that, beyond that, it's just like space and time, right? Where are you going to store it, and how long does it need to sit there?
Exactly. And when I think about packaging in general, those are like the 5 things, the 5 main topics that are going through my mind. Contamination, or reducing the risk of contamination, reducing the risk of oxidation, ensuring consistency, mostly in terms of carbonation level, right? How much space is it going to take up? How much time is it going to take for these beers to be ready? These are all things that matter to me. I mean, are there any other things that come to mind for you when it comes to packaging besides that, or?
I guess temperature. With a keg, you're probably going to store that cold, unless you're doing a keg condition approach. But with the bottles, you have to store them warm for at least a couple weeks, or at least room temp. And so then you're like, well, do I want to then, once these bottles are carb, do I want to store them in the fridge the entire time? Do I have the space for that? So I think that's kind of the 6th element is temperature.
Yeah, and I suppose I would view temperature as being a part of the time thing, because really, you're right. Like temperature, it's great. The colder the beer is, the quicker it's going to clarify. So if you've got beers in bottles that are sitting out for 3 weeks, then you have to move those into a fridge. You got to wait for them not only to cool down, but also probably to drop clear as well. You have a keg that's in the fridge, it's going to start dropping clear right away while carbonating. So yeah, I agree with that. It impacts time the most though. So what I thought we would do is, again, we're going to break down the 2 most common methods for packaging beer, which is going to be bottling and kegging. And then we're going to go into the way that we've, used to get beer into bottles from a keg. I just think it's important to go over both of these methods. So the first one, the most common one for people who are starting out in brewing. In fact, I'm kind of curious what the consensus is on, new brewers these days, if they're just jumping right into kegging the way they seem to be jumping right into all grain brewing now, as opposed to starting with extract like you and I did. For me, at least, when I started, I bottle conditioned the first 10 batches of beer or so that I brewed before I jumped into kegging. And in doing that, this is, you gotta, you take your finished beer, it's done fermenting, you mix it with some priming sugar, probably in a bottling bucket. So that means you're moving that beer from the fermenter to a bottling bucket. And then you're mixing it with priming sugar, which involves, some level of agitation to homogenize the priming sugar solution into that beer. You're racking it to bottles, and each of those bottles has to be cleaned. It's a pain in the ass, in my opinion, but you're doing all that, then you're capping them, and then you're storing them in usually 2 boxes for a 5-gallon batch. So you start to break down all of these things. What's the risk of contamination, oxidation? What's the consistency? How much space does it take? And how long does it take? What are your thoughts on bottling?
Well, I think I'm the lone bottler in the crew, right? And I'm a strong believer there are certain styles that benefit from bottling, or there might be styles that you just don't really want in a keg because you're not trying to drink it that fast. Maybe a, 16% barrel-aged stout or a sour beer. And so I think that there really is a time and a place for bottling, even amongst those that routinely keg their beers. But I think there's just a few styles that they're better in a bottle. And so I think it's worth the effort. And if you're brewing a lot of beer, like some of us, you're probably not making bottle conditioned beers every batch. And so it's really not that bad, a couple times a year to bust out your old bottling equipment and get into some bottles, but if that was the only method at my disposal, you can see why people transition to kegging if they're really into it.
Yeah. I not only do I see it, I fully understand why they did it. I'm not against bottle conditioning every once in a while. I guess my point, just to clarify my opinion on this, is that I would never, I don't think I would be where I'm at today in brewing if I didn't switch over to kegging, meaning if I was bottling every batch that I brewed. It's such a cumbersome process. Now, again, to use these 5 considerations of bottling that we talked about earlier, contamination. You have to make sure that every bottle is clean and sanitized. You have to make sure that your bottling wand clean and sanitized, your tubing, your caps. Those are all factors that could potentially, there could be a vector for contamination for a batch of beer. Oxidation, all of that transferring. Now, one of the big arguments for bottle conditioning that people say, and I actually think there's some evidence to support this claim, is that, you're moving that beer from the fermenter to the bottling bucket. It's unquestionably being exposed to oxygen, but it's for such a small amount of time that oxygen doesn't have, there's not enough time for that oxygen to take hold and actually ruin the beer, because once it gets into that bottle and you cap it off, re-fermentation starts up almost immediately. That's how you're getting that carbonation in that bottle conditioned beer. And during that process, any oxygen that is present, any dissolved oxygen, ends up getting consumed by that yeast, and you're good to go. Now, I actually cannot think. Now, I don't know how many bottle conditioned beers that I've had in my life, but I can't think of a single one that ever had noticeable oxidation. So I do wonder, if this isn't a good method for things like hazy IPA and stuff,
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something you've heard is like Sierra Nevada putting a little bit of bottling yeast to theirs. I think maybe New Belgium used to do that too. I don't know if they still are, and certainly has a oxygen scavenging effect. And I'm sure Scott Janish has looked into this as well, at least at the homebrew level, as yet another way we can mitigate some of the oxygen. And so that's clearly a big benefit from using a bottle conditioning approach. And you can really double down on that too, which is what I do these days, is do my bottle conditioning approach with kegs, using CO2 to push things around, use my Blichmann BeerGun to fill the bottles that I'm CO2 purging. And so we can even further mitigate oxygen exposure and then still have the additional insurance associated with the re-fermentation of the bottle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, some of the bigger concerns that I have when it comes to, or the issues I suppose I have with bottle conditioning, one is consistency. Almost every batch of beer that I made where I was bottle conditioning them before I went to kegging, there were always a couple bottles that just didn't carbonate enough, or you'd get one that was like, not a bottle bomb, but a gusher, maybe just a little bit more, priming sugar in that one than in the other ones. And then, making sure to measure out the exact right amount of priming sugar and keeping your fingers crossed that it hits that level of carbonation that you're aiming for. That's a big issue with me when you're kegging. We'll talk about this in a minute. That is it's a non-issue. If you overcarb or undercarb, you could fix it within a day or two. Mm-hmm. The other thing is space. If you're bottle conditioning, you really do. I mean, you really ought to keep those beers warm for, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 1 week if it's a lower OG beer or lower carbonated beer. But, 2 2 boxes for a 5-gallon batch. It's about 46 to 50 bottles, depending on how full you make those bottles. You got to find some place to put those. For me, it was always a closet. And then we had kids, and those closets were then my kids' closets, like it just took up space that I didn't have. And then the other thing is time. Again, it kind of goes along with what you were saying about temperature. That space has to be fairly warm. And so then I keep those out for 2 to 3 weeks, and now I put them in my fridge. And what I found I was doing was keeping them in the fridge for another 2 to 3 weeks, just because I wanted them to clear up. You're at 6 weeks now on an IPA or something. And I'm sitting there going, God, that's a long time to drink a freaking beer. I keg an IPA and I'm drinking it 3 days later.
Right.
It's significant. And I like fresh beer. So, I'm using burst carbonation. You have all of these options available to you. So that's kind of the very generals of bottle conditioning. Let's move on to kegging, which Jordan, I just love kegging.
Well, I'm sure there are those that are listening to this episode that still just bottle, and they're going to get a little jealous here because it is so much easier. And like you said, you can dial in the carbonation so much easier. You can fix undercarbed or overcarbed beers fairly easily. Also, if you have like too much sulfur or something like that in the keg, you can blast that off fairly easily. Where once it's in the bottle, it's kind of stuck and trapped in there. But just the ease of cleaning a keg alone versus cleaning 50 bottles. And, I'm just too cheap and like sustainability minded to like buy new bottles every time. I guess we didn't really talk about that, but that would be a pretty significant cost. A bottle is 50 cents to up to maybe $3 for like the fancier Belgian style bottles. The cost of the bottle could exceed the cost of the pint in terms of the brewing ingredients, right? So kegging is just cheaper. You're not necessarily using any sugar. You're using CO2. You could even get, really tricky and try to naturally carbonate these beers with the, fermentation off-gassing, or maybe storing that CO2 from your fermentation to push things around. So,
or Spunding valves. Yep. I mean, there's so many options. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so it's just one vessel that you only have to clean once, and then you only have to fill it once, and you're able to do this oftentimes under pressure with no oxygen getting in. And so it just kind of resolves all of the problems associated with bottling.
Yeah, God, I love it. You mentioned 50 bottles versus 1 keg. I mean, just that factor alone has so many downstream positives for me, or benefits. Contamination. First off, kegs are stainless steel. Mm-hmm. I feel like glass is about as easy to clean as stainless steel. You don't have to worry too much about scratching or anything like that. Little places where you might be able to harbor microbes. But glass breaks, stainless steel does not break. Good luck trying to get it to break. You could fill up an entire keg with hot ass water and PBW or whatever, and get a clean toilet brush or whatever you use for your keg cleaning down in there, and within 5 minutes have just a pristinely clean keg that you then fill up with some. I use the same Star Sand solution for 6 weeks, and I'll just pour it into my keg, leave it in there until I'm ready to keg, pour it out, leave the bubbles in there, transfer I do closed transfer, so zero risk of oxidation. There is just, it just is so easy. And I know, like you said, there's going to be people listening going, man, I only wish I had the finances or the space or whatever to do this. Over, the course of maybe 5 batches, you're going to make your money back on it. And it saves you time. It is not, get on Facebook Marketplace and look for used kegs right now. I bought 4 from a dude on my way home from work, last month. I got 4 kegs for $100, $25 a pop. Ball lock kegs, dude. All in great shape. Like, people are getting rid of stuff right now. Take advantage of that. Okay. And I'm going to be done selling kegging to people here. Lower risk of oxidation, big one. The consistency factor is probably what gets me the most. You carbonate that beer, the entire beer is carbonated the same. It's that simple. You set it to what you want it. You figure out the approach that you want to take to carbonating it, and you're going to get there no matter what. Now, yeah, there are some people who will talk about issues carbonating, high OG beers, like a pure Imperial Stout might take a little bit longer. You might not perceive the fizz the way that you would in a 1050 OG blonde ale or whatever. You'll figure it out though. Space. I mean, it takes up what is the top? What's the diameter of one of these kegs? Like 7 inches. It's more of like a skyscraper than it is a low fat, box of bottles, and it just takes up no space. Yeah, you got to have a kegerator or something to serve it out of, but there are some clever ways to get around that as well. The first batch of beer that I brewed here, I lost a whole bunch of my serving gear, so I just spent $6 on some Cobra taps and tubing and connected it and it worked beautifully. You could toss it into a fridge. That's what I did. I put it in our fridge that wasn't my kegerator, and I had a Cobra tap on it and some CO2, and that was it. And I was serving beautifully carbonated kegged beer. So many options. You do not have to build a coffin. You do not have to build a keezer. I would suggest you do. It makes it really cool when friends come over, but it's just awesome. So space, time, all of it to me is better with kegging than it is to bottling, but I might be missing something there.
Well, I think there's two other big advantages I see. One is that you can have a smaller keg. They make 1 gallon kegs. I think even half-gallon kegs, 3-gallon kegs, and you could fit that in your grocery store, kitchen fridge. If you just accommodate the space for it, and you can have this little adapter for CO2 that fits right on the post. And you don't need a kegerator. You could do this in your kitchen fridge, like for apartment brewers, et cetera, out there.
Oh yeah.
And then the other thing is bottle bombs. You're never going to have a keg explode. But anyone that's bottled homebrew has had a bottle bomb, whether they heard it or they open the box, they're like, this bottle is empty and is missing
and the bottom
bottom.
Fell out of it.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, man, I agree. And just a little, not to put too fine a point on the whole small keg thing. Check out Oxbar kegs from Kegland. These things are amazing. They are PET. They're like the brown PET, so they're not very expensive. And I do believe they look like 2-liter bottles, like soda bottles. You can actually they make faucets that fit them, and you can regulate the pressure and the flow. I've heard from so many people who are using these for the same thing that you mentioned. They're like apartment brewers who make 1-gallon batches of beer, and they'll have 4 or 5 of these things lined up in a section of their fridge in their apartment, and they're pouring beer off of these, and they've got variety, and they get to brew a lot because it's only a gallon. But when you've got 4 of them, now you got 4 gallons of beer, 5 gallons of beer, right? It's really, really cool, the products that are out there now. And we are big fans of Kegland, and just the uniquely convenient products that they're pushing out. So that's our breakdown, kind of the generals of bottling and kegging. Now let's move on to bottling from a keg. And there are various reasons one might choose to do this. I like the one that you brought up. It's not a reason that I've ever done, but you can actually, bottle. So rather than using a bottling bucket, if you want to bottle condition like a normal bottle conditioner, rather than using a bottling bucket, if you have the proper fermentation vessel and a keg, you can actually close transfer that finished beer into a keg that has priming sugar, use that instead of the bottling bucket, and then use one of the doohickeys we're going to talk about here in a minute to then transfer in a very closed loop, clean way to bottles, which I think, even if you are ultimately bottle conditioning, not carbonating in the keg, you are going to get much greater consistency, a much lower risk of contamination and oxidation. It's just really cool.
Yeah. And if you're crazy like me, you can even use a carb cap to then close transfer the bottling sugar into the keg as well. And so it's just easier than a bottling bucket, honestly, if you have the equipment. And so it just shows that you can do both. You can bottle some of your beers, you can keg some of your beers, you can do split batches. I think there's some opportunities there. But, let's assume that we want to bottle from a clean, CO2 force carbed batch of IPA or Helles or something like that. There's a few different ways you could go about it, and I think the rough and tumble way would just be straight from the faucet. And this is what they used to do with the growler shops, is they'd just put a little piece of vinyl tubing on the line. If you were lucky, they'd CO2 purge it, and they would just fill a growler from the bottom up. But if you're really wanting to play with the fire, you could even just go straight from the tap and let it just flow down the side of the vessel. But, if doing that, it really helps to have a larger vessel like a growler. It's going to be kind of challenging to fill a 12-ounce bottle with that method because there'd probably be a lot of foaming. So also, if you have a really highly carbonated beer, this is even more challenging. So I don't recommend it, but maybe if you're going to a buddy's house that's like next door, this is a fine way to go about it. But there are better methods than just going straight from the faucet.
Yeah, well, there are better methods if you're neurotic like me, and I presume you as well, Jordan, on some level. That I just would worry so much about something happening. But I do have a story. One of my closer brewing friends locally was one of the guys who bottled straight from the faucet. He would reduce his serving pressure down to 3 psi, take a nice sanitized bottle, and then he would purge the lines a little bit. And then once it was flowing with no foam, just nice cold carbonated beer, tiny flow, he would hold his bottle up and almost like you would a pint glass, fill it up, cap on foam. He won more competition awards than anybody in our group doing it this way. So, no hate. I mean, you've got a lot to be concerned about there. One of the things that I would be concerned about using this method, and it's also something else we're going to talk about later on down the line, is what bugs might be in your faucet, right? Who knows? Are you taking any measures to sanitize your faucet before doing that? Obviously, you're exposing that beer to some level of oxygen. Is the CO2 that's getting pushed out of that beer forcing any present oxygen out of the bottle as well, such that you don't have to worry as much about it? I don't know. It's not a method that makes me feel good, that leaves me, low stress. So as easy as it is, to me, the cons of bottling that way really do make it kind of negate that as an option for somebody as neurotic as me. The first thing that I ever used, so I have a buddy, Tommy Caprellian. He owns House of Pendragon Brewing Company. When he started the professional brewing thing, 14, 15 years ago now, he had a bunch of home brewing gear that he was letting us friends like permanently borrow, if you will. And I took his Blichmann BeerGun. So I took it, I retubed it, I did all that. So I was using that first for my bottling, and I liked it. But there were issues that I had with it, and we'll talk about the Blichmann BeerGun here in a minute. So I looked up other options that I felt would be easier. What I wanted to do was be able to just turn my faucet on and bottle directly off of the tap, the way that my friend earlier was, but using a counter pressure method that reduced oxygen exposure and that allowed me to fill in a more controlled manner, such that, I wasn't over foaming or making as big of a mess. And that is this whole counter pressure approach, which is, we're going to get into the Tapcooler counter pressure filler, because that is the kind of the philosophy that runs off of. Basically, with counter pressure filling, you've got a wand that's attached to some tubing, and it's connected to the faucet. For most counter pressure fillers, you're connecting it straight to the faucet, and there's usually some special adapter that you can buy for a faucet. My understanding is you cannot do this with, your cheap regular kind of beer faucets that get stuck all the time. You need something like a Perlick faucet or a Nuka tap, which is what I use. And Nuka tap actually makes you can unscrew the faucet nozzle and put different things on there. One of them being a ball lock connection that you can then use for these purposes. It's really cool, really convenient. So the tip of the wand then is placed at the bottom of the bottle. Of course, everything is sanitized, clean, all that stuff. And then there's a bung that will kind of go into the top of the bottle and seal it. Then you open up the tap, and what happens is, that tap gets open, and then the beer flows until the pressure in the bottle matches the serving pressure from the keg. At which point the beer just stops to flow and it sits there. And then what you can do, and the Tapcooler makes this very easy. The doohickey that I built and sold to people for a while, you would just kind of press the side of the bung until it would, let some of the CO2 that had built up in the bottle out. That would start the flow of beer again, but you could modulate how fast it would flow based on how much, of an opening there was between that bung and the bottle lip. And then you would fill the bottle to where you want it, pull out the thing, cap it, and move on. And I could I think I did like 16 bottles. I timed it one time. I was able to get 16 bottles done in under 10 minutes. And it's clean. I would do it in a kind of like a shallow tub type of deal, just to make sure. Totally clean, simple. When you're done, you just unscrew the nipple, your faucet nipple, put the other one back on, go clean up, and you're ready to go.
Now, when you were using this, I didn't hear if you said this. Were you purging with CO2 at all?
No, that is so I'm glad you asked that. Because I feel like the BeerGun really does have the advantage of the purge. Back when I started using this, we're talking like 15 years ago. This method, this was before the Tapcooler had been produced. Once the Tapcooler came out, to me, I picked one up. Of course, I used it several times. It worked exactly the same. So I kind of put both in the same camp in terms of convenience. The Tapcooler does have some nice features to it, but the BeerGun is kind of known for the ability very easily to purge with CO2. I get that. What I had always been told, and I'm sure you heard the same thing, Jordan, was that when you're filling from the bottle up, it's pushing any oxygen that's in there out and creating a blanket of CO2 over the surface, that very small surface of beer as the beer is coming up that bottle. So ostensibly, when you pull the wand out, all that CO2 is pushing the oxygen out. You cap on it and you're good to go. You don't have any issues. Now, as far as I remember, who really knows? I don't remember having issues with oxidation in those beers. And so I use that as kind of self-validation, I guess.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical that eliminates the oxygen, because the beer itself is still exposed to oxygen during the filling process, right? And so even if you're pushing a lot of it out of the headspace, it still had contact with oxygen. And I think that our standards around like low oxygen exposure fresh beer are a lot higher now, both in home brewing and pro brewing. And so maybe our palates are a little more refined these days. But that is the beauty of the Tapcooler, is it has a CO2 purge feature. And so it has this little thing on the side, and you can buy an adapter that you can, I think, attach a ball lock gas QD directly to it, or you can use like a little Kegland style, like thin line of CO2 that just goes directly into it. I like the adapter because then you don't have to have a special CO2 line or disconnect your ball lock QD. And yeah, so you just attach that on there, and then you can purge with a button. And what's unique, I guess, is that different than the Blichmann BeerGun? You'll have to correct me on this, but it uses the same hole, if you will, that the beer liquid flows through to shoot the CO2 into it. The Blichmann, they use a different line, don't they? That it's So that is the one difference there, I guess, is that it's the same tube that the CO2 and the beer flows through. But the Tapcooler, it's this telescopic little metal device, and so it is a lot smaller to store as well. It breaks down to this thing that's like about the size of like your hand in terms of like the length, and it's just really small. Whereas the BeerGun, it has a freaking briefcase that it gets stored in, and so there's a pro and a con there, right? Like the pro is it's way smaller and it effectively does the same thing. It also, you don't have to attach it to the keg. You go straight into the faucet. But the con there is it's also flimsier. This BeerGun is like thick stainless steel, whereas the Tapcooler is this flimsy little telescope. And honestly, mine broke. And
did it?
Yeah. And I've heard this before too. It's a great product, but they're not as sturdy. And maybe if they hear this, they'll send me a new one. But I don't use it anymore because it broke, and it's like, it's kind of flimsy, and so that's a bummer. But it does work while it's still functioning. And I think the other big con that you kind of alluded to earlier is if your lines are dirty, then your beer could be dirty as well. And so one would hope that they're keeping their Blichmann BeerGun hose tubing really clean. But if you're not really good about keeping your serving lines clean, you could get ultimately contaminated bottles, especially if you're not storing them cold.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And I just want to clarify, I agree fully that that when you're serving or putting beer into a non-CO2 purged bottle, that it is coming into contact with oxygen. I have zero, I'm not deluded by that. What I was saying is that I just didn't experience that I can recall. I haven't bottled beer in years, but that I can recall I didn't experience any oxidation because of that. But I also know for a fact that gases mix. And there's this idea that because CO2 is heavier than oxygen, that even using a BeerGun, which we'll talk about here next, by, doing 5 seconds in the bottle, purging these bottles for 5 seconds, that it is just this, pure layer of CO2 that's rising up in the, invisibly rising up in these bottles and pushing all of the oxygen out. Are you ridding the bottle of some oxygen? Probably most of it, but I'm not convinced it's 100% of it. So even using that method, and this is why I went with my homemade counter pressure filler, because I like to make stuff, 15, 20 years ago, is because of this idea. Well, if we're relying, the BeerGun relies on CO2 to push the oxygen out, but gases mix and it's still being exposed to some oxygen. And I'm relying on beer, which is slowly flowing into the bottom of that glass, that jar, or the bottle. Is it effectively doing the same thing? What I would love is a comparison between these two and like a dissolved oxygen, a DO meter test to see how much dissolved oxygen is actually in each. But I do think what Blichmann BeerGun, besides the build quality, despite being a bit bigger, another thing that it really does have going for it is the ability to very easily, just by the click of a trigger, if you will, purge bottles of oxygen.
Right. And there was a really cool presentation at the San Diego 2015 HomebrewCon, I want to say, by a brewer from New Belgium. And they actually tested DO in bottle, maybe cans too, at least bottles, from their bottling line versus some various methods like straight from the tap, purging the thing first, then straight from the tap, the Blichmann BeerGun, etc. And the Blichmann BeerGun had the lowest DO readings of all the measurements, including the New Belgium's professional bottling line. And in fact, this is like a well-known competition secret for GABF. A lot of the brewers that are winning have a Blichmann BeerGun that they will hand bottle their competition entries because it's that good relative to a professional bottling line.
That is awesome. And kudos to Blichmann. I mean, John Blichmann is an engineering genius when it comes to homebrewing stuff, and I'm sure other things. That the fact that there's real objective data backing that up, I think that's a, score one for the BeerGun on that front. We've already talked a bit about it. The BeerGun has two actuators. One of them, I'll call them triggers just because it's called a BeerGun. You pull the CO2 beer actuator or trigger, and you 5 seconds of purging in the bottom of the bottle. You then pull the trigger for the flow of the beer. You are connecting the BeerGun to a CO2 tank and to the ball lock liquid outpost on your keg. So you are reducing yet one more vector for contamination by not using the faucet. This is one of those things this is how neurotic I am. Part of the reason I moved away from using the BeerGun, which always worked great for me, I hated that I would have to open my kegerator door, my Keyser lid, and connect this. And I couldn't, where I live in the summer, it gets to 110, 114 degrees. I didn't want the hot air going into my Keyser or kegerator. And so even just having it open that small 1/2 inch amount, with that the tubing takes up when it's coming out, I just worried me and I felt like I was wasting energy. So being able to connect it to my faucet, I was able to leave everything closed. I know that's kind of a nerdy reason for moving away from it, but it does connect direct to the keg, which it has major benefits in terms of reducing the risk for contamination. The other big thing is it is not counter pressure. I got this question a while ago. Somebody said, what really is the difference between these? This sounds like they do the same thing. The BeerGun, you have to set your serving pressure to a low enough PSI that you're able to serve without it over foaming. You want to cap on foam. If you're doing it, like I said, in a bin, you can waste some beer, but inevitably you are going to have some beer spill. If you're doing it capping on foam the way that we do it, or your PSI is set to anywhere north of about 6. I don't know what you set yours to when you're using the BeerGun. I always went with 6. You're going to get a little bit of foaming that's probably going to come over the lip of that bottle until you get your beer to the level that you want it in the bottle before you cap on it. That was my experience, at least. Not really a con because it's not that much beer. And maybe there's the payoff is that, all of these other factors, oxidation and contamination, are reduced enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually found the counter pressure, the pressure that builds up in the nipple that you have to connect it to, kind of annoying. Whereas with the Blichmann BeerGun, you just go in and you purge and then you fill and then you cap on foam, and it's just easier as opposed to connecting it to the nipple and then the pressure that builds up. And I actually found that with higher carbonated beers, which I love, the Tapcooler type solution is really challenging because when you disconnect the bottle in that vacuum state with a highly carbonated beer, pop, and then it starts foaming, right? Whereas with the BeerGun, you can use a really low PSI, and you're not creating a unsealing of the vacuum effect when you pull the BeerGun out, and then you don't have this additional foaming that makes capping and sealing a full bottle of beer really challenging if it's super carved. So that's yet another pro for the BeerGun. But what's interesting for me is anyone, and I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that have this, the Komos kegerator that was popularized by More Beer. They had a sale a few years ago, and I got one. And because I have this old commercial kegerator that a restaurant that went out of business, I got it from them. And it's like loud and shitty and kind of disgusting. And so when they went on sales, like, this is the perfect opportunity to finally get like a good one. And it has its own digital temperature control on it, which actually broke. So I'm stuck at like 38, but it's fine. But the problem is it's a smaller footprint. And dude, it is so hard to attach or detach a liquid or a gas QD in the Komos kegerator because there's like no room for your hand.
Oh yeah.
Especially if you have all four kegs in there. And especially if you're trying to change the QD in one of the back two kegs. Like, your hand physically doesn't fit. There's not enough like clearance for your hand, and then when you like get it in there through like the catacombs of all of the the QDs and the associated lines, like getting your damn hand at the right angle and then pulling it off and then reattaching it sucks. It's like impossible. And you don't want to pull the kegs out because we're all using gelatin findings, etc., and we'd be kicking up a bloom of debris, and then all of a sudden we have hazy beer again. And so that's one of the reasons why I actually like the Tapcooler is with these like smaller footprint kegerators, I can't get my damn hand in there to disconnect the QD. And so that was a huge life hack upgrade, was the ability to go straight through the tap.
Okay, 100% with you on that. And by the way, you could tell we like both of these products. People are probably wondering why the hell did they do an experiment comparing these bits of gear. One, we were curious, but two, we got a bunch of questions from people out there asking us if there's a difference. And so we'll test anything. You did an experiment comparing each of those with a Czech Dark Lager. So just in keeping with tradition, we'll give the BJCP description of that style as a rich, dark, malty Czech lager with roast character that can vary from almost absent to quite prominent, malty balance, and an interesting complex flavor profile with variable levels of hopping that provides a range of possible interpretations. To me, if it's a lager, you want to do everything you can to avoid contamination, oxidation, as you would with any beer. But, an oxidized dark lager is, in my opinion, you're going to notice that if it is noticeably oxidized. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's why Czech Dark Lagers in the bottle shop from Czechia suck, because they're old and oxidized and stale. Whereas you go to a place like Wayfinder, where they're just making this incredible, locally produced, fresh Czech Dark Lager, it is magical and is a totally different experience than those beat up bottles you can find from a specialty shop. I'm actually going to Prague in September, and I am so freaking stoked to try fresh Czech Dark Lager on draft from the Lucre tap in the Czech Republic. It is just not the same by the time those bottles make it over here.
If you're going to Prague, you have to go to Ufleku. It is
definitely
the coolest place on earth. Yeah, you got to go there. I'm with you. Now, I've used both the Blichmann BeerGun and Tapcooler counter pressure bottle fillers. And while both seem to work just fine for my purposes, I've never compared beers from the same batch that were bottled using either of those products. You were curious enough to test that out, Jordan. Those results when we're back from this break. Stop guessing and start perfecting your craft with Brewfather, the ultimate tool for recipe design. Brewfather Premium unlocks advanced inventory tracking, tilt integration for real-time fermentation monitoring, and seamless cloud sync across all of your devices. But wait, there's more. Premium Plus just changed the game with Brewfather's brand new AI recipe integration. Whether you're looking to clone a rare commercial classic or need a creative spark for a unique grain bill, Brewfather AI helps you build balanced, world-class recipes in seconds. Brewing is a science. Make it art with Brewfather Premium Plus by visiting brewfather.app today. That's brewfather.app. Better beer is just a click away. Now, I mentioned earlier about my friend who is bottling directly off the tap. I've got friends, though, who swear by the Blichmann BeerGun. I've got friends who swear by counter pressure bottle fillers like the Tapcooler. That one friend is still filling directly from his faucet, doesn't seem to have any issues with that. But we're going to ignore him for now. The whole Blichmann BeerGun versus counter pressure bottle filler, it's surprisingly, I wouldn't say contentious, but it is something that people talk about. I've certainly had several conversations about it. Do they make a difference? Does one, do better with maintaining carbonation or reducing oxidation than the other? You were curious and you put it to the test, Jordan.
Right. And like we just talked about in the last segment, I really think that Czech Dark Lager is an ideal style because it really shows its wear if you have some oxygen in the package. So let's talk through the recipe first before we get to bottling. So this is my kind of house recipe. This is borrowed from correspondence I had with Ashley Carter at Bierstadt Lager House. And I think that the Wayfinder recipe might be inspired by that as well. So really approach to Czech Dark Lager. Can't recommend this recipe enough. We're looking at about 47% Vienna malt and 47% Pilsner malt. I personally prefer European varieties, but you can still make a great one with American or Canadian varieties as well. And then we're looking at 5% Carafa Special 3 and 2% Cara Munich 3. And I will note that Carafa I add after the mash. So I just sprinkle it on the top and then turn the pump back on, let that recirculate a little bit during that mash out period, which, by the way, for this one, we did 45 minutes at 144F or 62C, followed by 30 minutes at 157F or 69C. Then we add that Carafa for the mash cap and then raise that up to for 15 minutes at 170F or 77C for the mash out, which gets us a nice dark color, not too dark, and avoids the risk of any, overly roasty characters, which actually aren't really appropriate in the style.
Yeah, I like going back to the grist. I really like the split of Vienna malt and Pilsner malt being equal. That's what I've done in my CDL in the past. I've had Bierstadt's Czech Dark Lager, and it is phenomenal. It's funny to me because I have this kind of bias against Cara Munich in general. The one time I used it, I did it in my Tiny Bottom Pale Ale, and I thought it was just so gross. It was just so rich, but I can see where that would work really well in a style like Czech Dark Lager at a rate of just 2%, just to give that little malty oomph, right? I'm going to have to try this recipe.
Well, and Ashley even mentioned to me, I believe, that she got this is based on her recipe that she got from Ufleku and her experience at Ufleku. And I think, I'm going off memory here, but it was like they used an astonishing amount of Cara Munich, like maybe upwards of 10%. And she was just like, I'm not doing that. And so it'll be very interesting to try it in person later this year and see how much Cara Munich character I'm getting from it. But I believe that she dialed that down with the same exact reasons that you've described, that Cara Munich's kind of intense. And I actually made a Cara Munich heavy Czech Dark Lager one time, and it's a bit much. It's just too rich. And so I like this because you get a level of richness as like an underlying note, but it's not dominating the beer by any means.
Well, I'll say I had, Ufleku is one of those rad places that they come around on full trays of smaller glasses of beer. They have a pale lager and they have their CDL, and that's it. And when you have an empty cup, they come over and you want another one, and they give you another one. I did not taste Cara Munich, and I would have felt like I would have noticed it, which I think says a lot about my own bias against Cara Munich here. They're delicious. They're dry. They're crisp, and so I want one right now. So again, I'm gonna have to try that recipe. I like it. What hops did you use in this one? I think I know the answer.
I really think that using Sots are an important, or some sort of Czech variety, are an important ingredient. So that's what I did here is I used Czech Sots, 99 grams at 60 minutes and then 71 grams at 40 minutes. I will say that I recently used some US Sots in a different Czech lager. They worked great. And then once in a pinch, I used Tettnang. I know that's one of your favorite hops.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that can also work. I'd love to one of these days finally experiment with some of these more modern Czech varieties that are out there. But typically, I'm using Czech Sots.
Yeah, that's any Czech beer that I make. I reach for Czech Sots. Some German beers that I make, I reach for Sots. I do love Tettnanger. I think in some styles like Helles, unless you're using a very, very small amount, Tettnanger can be a little too much. And so I will go with, maybe a middle fruit or something like that. But Sots for any Czech lager, to me, is kind of the go-to.
Mm-hmm. And so once we've then finished boiling these beers, we're chilling them, transferring them to the fermenter, and we're at 1048 OG, which is, pretty much on the money.
Beautiful. Yep.
So we're then getting those in my fermentation chamber. I'm getting those down to about 50F or 10C. And at that point, I'm pitching Imperial Yeast L28 Urkel. And that strain, I like to ferment a little warmer than my Germans. German beers might be closer to 48. Whereas this, I'm a little, 50 or a little north of that, just because it seems that they don't like it as cold as some of those German strains. So after a week at 50F, I'm gradually raising that temperature to 62F or 17C over the course of a few days, kind of that tasty McDowell method of getting the bulk of the fermentation done at a colder temperature and then raising it up to finish attenuation and to do a very important diacetyl rest as this yeast variety is notorious for diacetyl production. And so this is definitely the time, in my opinion, to break out the ALDC. I know that there are varying levels of diacetyl in authentic Czech beers, but in my opinion, I don't want it in there. So I'm doing everything I can to get rid of the diacetyl.
Yeah, I love that strain. That's the Pilsner Urquell strain. I think most people, that's why it's called Urkel. And the other issue that I've experienced with that one is that it can take a little bit longer to kick off, to really get fermenting compared to something like Global. And so, don't be scared, but this is one, I'm kind of leaning into just, if you have fresh yeast, just pitch that and go with it and, hope that it works out. If I'm fermenting with this strain, I will either make a vitality starter if it's a fresh pouch, or I have no qualms, making a standard viability starter and propping that yeast, and then even adding a little bit of fresh wort to it for an hour and spinning it before pitching, just to get that yeast ready to go. Because I've had the experience of pitching a perfectly fresh pouch, or even I think it was 2 pouches into a batch of wort and having it take over 24 hours to show signs of that fermentation has started. That is one of the more anxiety provoking things, I think, for most brewers, is like, was the yeast dead? What's going on here? So just something to keep in mind if using that incredibly great strain otherwise. Mm-hmm.
And something else that's notable for this strain, and I'm sure the grist influences this, is a higher FG than you would experience with a German lager strain like 3470. And so this is right where you want it. This finished at 1014. We do want a slightly higher FG for these Czech Dark Lagers to give them a little bit of body. But, obviously you wouldn't want this to be 1030 FG. So you're looking for that 1014 to 1018 range. And we were right there. And so it's time to cold crash this beer to 31F or 0.5C. And after that was cold, we're pressure transferring that to a CO2 purge serving keg and letting it lager on gas for a month, at which point it was clear, carbonated, and ready to drink.
All right. I want to drink some right now. I imagine that you were probably sampling it off of your faucet. The best thing about kegging is the ability to taste it along the way, right? We love doing that. But obviously the variable here was the comparison between a BeerGun and a Tapcooler. And there are some things that come into play in terms of, I think, testing this variable out the best. But, tell us about what you ended up doing for the variable.
Right. So I filled 12 bottles using the BeerGun and 12 using the Tapcooler. We really described how these both work in the previous section, so I'm not going to go through those again. But I will say they were both, attached as they're supposed to be, either via the faucet for the Tapcooler or via the ball lock for the BeerGun. And I used a purging process that's available on both, and filled 12 bottles, capping on foam, good, fills with the appropriate level of airspace there in the neck, and then stored those cold because they were already carbonated at 45F or 7C for 7 more weeks before serving to tasters for evaluation. And I did that on purpose. I typically, once we've got the beers ready to go, let's start collecting the data, right? But if we had filled these and then went straight to the homebrew club meeting, there probably wouldn't be a big difference. And so this gives it an opportunity to maybe let any oxygen sink in, should any have been caught in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, this is just good experiment design, in my opinion. There will be people out there who, as a matter of course, because of who they are, disagree with that, and that's okay with us. But you're 7 weeks for oxidation to take hold. I mean, it doesn't take that long for oxidation to happen. Now, 45 degrees Fahrenheit, again, all microbiological or biological processes go faster with as temperature goes up. There's a positive correlation between temperature and reaction, and the same goes for, the cooler it is, the slower it's going to go. So 45 degrees Fahrenheit, yeah, some people might argue you should have stored them at 80 degrees. You should have, you can redo it if you want to, but we did 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's a fair comparison, or a fair, approach, because of the fact that most people are going to store their bottled beer in the fridge anyways, which most fridges are 36 to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was a little bit warmer than that. The other component here, though, is that time. You went 7 full weeks. I just feel like, yeah, that's a good amount of time for anything. Oxidation, contamination. If one of them has an issue with carbonation, right? One of the big concerns I always had with the BeerGun was that by filling it, that carbonated beer is going to release some of the CO2, and that's going to go out of the bottle, and you can't put it back in there. And so you're capping, maybe it would be less carbonated than, say, a counter pressure filler. That's why we did this experiment. So.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So when we poured these from the stored bottles, we do see that they look pretty identical in terms of like the color and the clarity, dark brown, really crystal clear, tan head. However, one of them didn't have the same level of kind of foam creation and stability. The BeerGun had better foam production and, it stuck around longer, probably better lacing, whereas the Tapcooler, it just instantly deflated. And if you look at the website, you can see it in glass photos. Pretty stark difference in terms of foam creation and stability. So it seems that there may be some sort of impact, at least in terms of visuals, as it relates to these two devices.
Well, okay, let's focus on this for a minute. We're going to do some speculation here, but was that a consistent observation of yours, that every time you opened one of those bottles, the Blichmann BeerGun had better foam stand than the Tapcooler?
100%. It's something I noticed immediately and continued through all of the bottles.
Okay, that to me, first off, it goes fully against what I just said. My expectation would have been that the BeerGun, because of the fact that it's expressing or you're losing more, ostensibly, CO2 out of that bottle than a fully sealed, and slowly released version, a counter pressure filler, that I would have assumed that the counter pressure filler, because of having, again, presumably more CO2 in it, that it would maintain that carbonation more, which we know carbonation is responsible for head formation. What do you make of the fact that the BeerGun had better foam than the Tapcooler? I'm trying to figure out what it might be at play here.
I don't know. And I will say that I had the same CO2 setting for both, and I did the same purge cycle for both. So they were filling at the same, pushing pressure, but I guess there is, head pressure or whatever, if you will, in the vacuum during the counter pressure filling method. And so somehow that's stripping out the head formation. I don't know how this is possible because they were filled from the same keg. This was a single 5-gallon batch that we were testing this on.
It's so weird. It makes me wonder, like, was the tubing the same? Like, was there some chemical, that maybe is like depleting or, disallowing those bubbles in the, you know what I'm saying? Like there's gotta be some explanation. If you're same exact keg of beer, right? 2 different methods of bottling or 2 different products for bottling, really, I would have expected, them to have the same foam. And it's just, this is one of the things that I really love about these gear comparisons. Look, we're not going to pretend that we thought that there would be, and we haven't even gotten into the triangle test data. We're not going to pretend that we thought that they would have a perceptible difference, right? Maybe they would, but I presumed they were going to taste identical at this point. When you compare gear, though, there's so much more than just the the triangle test data, the perceptible differences that you're looking at. You're looking at all of these other things, and right off the bat, the Tapcooler has lower head formation. One, it doesn't make sense to me, but it certainly opens that door for exploring what could possibly be responsible for that. I mean, I cannot think of anything other than like I said before, maybe there was some cleaning chemical left in the Tapcooler, or the tubing was different that came, I imagine, from, the manufacturer. Who knows?
You just exposed actually a really good confounding variable. And I think that this is going to be just inherent when testing these two. But I guess maybe you could line it up to be the same, but a lot of people might have different lines, right? And so now that you mention it, I have a oxygen, like low oxygen style of line in my kegerator. And it's this really firm line that I got like a decade ago from the Loto forums recommendation. And I don't know if you've ever messed around with this line, but it's like really rigid and it's really annoying to use. And it's like impossible to get on the bar because it's so rigid and it has no flexing whatsoever. But in theory, it's like a low oxygen line. And so, that's why the Loto people like it for serving on draft.
Is it the EVA barrier line?
No.
Okay.
It's called Bev Seal Ultra by AccuFlex.
Oh, yes. I have heard of that. Yeah. That was a big Loto thing. You're right.
Yeah, so I still have some remaining line, and I'd honestly love to swap my lines out just because they've been in there for a while. But it's so freaking hard to install that it's just like they're in there forever at this point. But I just use the standard line that the Blichmann BeerGun comes with, and I've probably replaced it, several times. But it's just the standard, really flexible stuff that people would use. And so maybe that is responsible for the head difference. However, I get incredible head formation and retention on my draft pours of various beers. And so I don't think it's killing head, but that is a confounding variable, and maybe that helps explain it. Or maybe it is the device itself, and some reason Blichmann does a better job.
Oh man, I'm so glad we had this conversation. This is honestly, people, you are hearing what Brülosophy does off air, live right now. This is the first time this has come up. And so I can't help but wonder if that tiny little piece of line that you have in there made the difference. I don't believe it did, but there's no way for us to say objectively that it didn't. So just put that out there.
Mm-hmm. But even though we're seeing a difference in terms of the head formation and retention, does it taste any different? Does it smell any different? So I did my own little semi-blind triangle test. I only got it 3 out of 5 times, and I think those were guesses. Really similarly crisp and clean, pleasant caramel and light roast notes, no signs of oxidation or contamination either, and similar, mouthfeel in terms of carbonation.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask, right? Again, foam is a function of carbonation. You don't get that foam without some form of bubble or gas in that beer to express itself and then to get caught in those bubbles, which are, proteins and yada yada. This isn't a foam episode, but the fact is, right off the bat, if I'm looking at a beer that has that is, said to be identical and just packaged differently, and I see one that has this nice creamy, 1-inch head of foam, and the other one that has a 1/4-inch cap of foam that is going away more quickly or dissipating more quickly, I'm starting to think, just from my experience in brewing, that that one probably has lower amount of CO2 in it. But what you're saying is, at least based on, your own very biased, semi-blind triangle tests, the carbonation, at least it wasn't enough for you to be able to tell them apart.
Right. And these are, medium carbonation beers. Maybe there would have been a difference if it was a super highly carbonated beer. But yeah, they really tasted the same, despite the fact that when I poured them, they definitely looked different.
Yeah, I mean, this is getting even more interesting. So you couldn't tell them apart, which I think hints at where we're headed here with the blind taster results. But that's the reason we do blind tasting. You served these beers to 24 tasters who had no idea what the variable was. All they saw was the beer and 3 different colored cups. The way the triangle test works, just to quickly reiterate, is you've got 3 cups. 2 of them are filled with beer from the same exact well, the same variable, usually the same bottle or whatever. One of them is the different beer, and the job of the taster is to try to distinguish what beer is different. In this case, with 24 tasters, we would have needed 13 to identify the unique sample in order for us to say with some degree of confidence that it really does seem, given how controlled both of these batches were brewed, that, it really does seem that the serving mechanism or the packaging mechanism, the BeerGun or the Tapcooler, was at play in them being able to tell these beers apart. And so, yeah, maybe there is, a meaningful impact that they might have. Again, 24 participants, 13 expected to get it right. For us to say that it's significant, out of those 24, how many actually got it right?
8, which is exactly 1/3, which is exactly what we would expect from random guessing.
That's exactly right. 8 people, you've got 3 cups. Random guessing, you would expect 8 people each, if they're identical beers, to pick them. And in this case, that really does seem to be what's suggested here, is that these beers perceptibly were identical. They tasted the same, they felt the same in the mouth, and they smelled the same. That also lines up with your own private, semi-blind triangle test, which sends the message to me that, yeah, regardless of which one you're reaching for, the BeerGun or the Tapcooler or some other, probably, we didn't test this out, but some homemade doohickey like I like to use. Chances are, if your process is good, you're sanitizing things, you're reducing your pressure so as not to overfoam, you're doing all of that stuff, you're going to get a decent product in that bottle. And I think that's pretty cool. I believe the Tapcooler does cost a little bit less than the Blichmann BeerGun. The BeerGun, again, is probably more durable, so you only need to buy one and done. Tapcooler, you might have to buy a couple over the years. So it's kind of a, take your pick. Are you more interested in durability and the product lasting a lifetime? Are you really careful with things? Maybe you can make a Tapcooler last forever. I don't know.
Can you physically fit your hand in the kegerator to attach the BeerGun?
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, so this was really interesting because I'd never done both side by side like this. And it revealed to me that I think that if you had both, the one or the other serves a different purpose. In terms of the ease of the bottling day, because we can say that, it seems that they produce similar qualities of beers in terms of oxygen mitigation, et cetera, carbonation. However, we do see that you get more foam out of the BeerGun, at least in this experiment. So assuming the line is not confounding that, maybe the BeerGun is the better method, assuming you want good head, maybe in a competition or when you're sharing it with your friends. But I will say that in terms of the actual process of using them, I found that the Tapcooler is better if you're bottling a couple beers to take to a friend's house or to a homebrew meeting, because it's just easier to quickly attach it to the tap faucet and, get the CO2, plugged in and just, grip it and rip it, and you're filled in a few minutes. It seems to me to be a little bit of an easier process. Maybe it's a little easier to clean because you can just kind of clean it in the faucet. Whereas with the BeerGun, you have to push, with CO2 cleaner through the BeerGun, yada, yada, yada. However, so it's like the setup and the takedown and the cleanup seems to be easier with the Tapcooler. But the actual filling of the bottle is a little bit more cumbersome in my opinion. And so for that reason, I actually think that the Blichmann BeerGun is a better choice for a big bottling run. If you're going to bottle via the keg, like an entire keg of beers or maybe an entire case of beers, I do think that the Blichmann BeerGun is a better solution because the process of filling 24 bottles, 12 bottles, etc., is easier bottle to bottle through the Blichmann BeerGun. It's just that the setup and the cleanup is a little slightly more challenging. So I think that's kind of the trade-off between the two.
Yeah, so you kind of stole what I was going to say a little bit, that I agree 100% that the BeerGun, and this is what I ended up using it for. If I was bottling, I'll just kind of give it away. When I would make sour beers, I'd force carbonate them. And I agree with you that there's probably, a meaningful difference between natural conditioning in the bottle and then bottling off the keg for sour beers. But I wanted to store these sour beers for years. And so for that, when I'm bottling, 45 bottles off of the keg of a Flemish Red or an Oud Bruin that I made many, many years ago, I would whip out the BeerGun and go through the process of setting it up. And it was just so easy to fill bottle after bottle after bottle after bottle of these sour beers that I just trusted, and sour beer, I think, can take a little bit of oxidation. That's an argument that some people have claimed out there. For me, it was just so easy. When I was bottling to take, I actually built my own counter pressure bottle filler alongside the Tapcooler, which I've used for both. If you're filling, growlers, you could get a bung the size of the growler. It's very, very easy to do. If I'm just filling growlers to take to a party or filling bottles for a local competition, I easily would not go through the process of setting up the BeerGun, and I'd pull out the counter pressure bottle filler because it was just, again, it was way more convenient. It took no time at all. I got into some trouble though. This is a giveaway. So I brewed a Märzen for the National Homebrewers Competition. I wish I could remember what year it was. I think it was 2017, 2018. It took second place in the first round with like a 46. I did the thing where I didn't want to rebrew that beer, so I just bottled a whole bunch at the same time. You see where this is going. So I had like 12 bottles on, I sent 2 in or 4 in, however many I needed to. It did really well in that first round of competition. They were judged within a week of me sending them in, so we were all good there. Well, we all know that the next time you send them in is, 6 weeks or so later. I did the same exact thing. They were already bottled. Thought, all right, they like that beer. They're going to love this beer. And I got a 26 because one of the bottles, or the bottle that they tasted at least, was contaminated.
Oh no.
Exactly. And it, shit happens. I get it. Nobody's perfect. And I'm fully convinced that it was probably my faucet. There was probably something up in there. I'm very neurotic about keeping my stuff clean and all of that, but you convince yourself of things sometimes to make your day easier. And maybe there was something up in there that caught hold, and those bottles did not turn out well. They even went for the second bottle, same issue with that. And so I didn't, progress on, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
Also just rebrew the beer, guys. It's such a much safer process. But in that experience, or in that, I think what would have helped resolve that issue is if I had used the BeerGun. And then, just one more pro for the BeerGun, like you said, there's objective data out there that it does result in lower DO, or dissolved oxygen, in the beer in the bottle. And to me, if you really want to win a competition, it's probably worth the extra 10 minutes of setup and teardown to use the BeerGun. That's just my opinion.
Right, and the extra $30 for the cost of the unit. I think the BeerGun's $120, the Tapcooler's $90. So honestly, at the end of the day, fairly similar price. And but they both serve a purpose, and really, there's no wrong answers here. What did our readers say? Did we get any feedback on this one?
Yeah, we did. So the first one comes from Minbari, who says, I've had a Tapcooler for years. In terms of simplicity, this wins hands down. It's easy to fill, takes 20 seconds to set up and 20 seconds to clean. There are no ball valves that are hard to operate when you're holding a bottle. And I feel like that's what we've talked about, that the Tapcooler, in terms of convenience, it wins, right?
Mm-hmm. For a couple bottles, but it is actually kind of more annoying to fill a ton of them with it. But that's a good point, actually. It hangs in place from the faucet, whereas with the BeerGun, you have to have this bucket of sanitizer next to you to set it down when you then use both hands to cap the bottle.
Right. Exactly. So, but that is again, I think the shared experience for people who are bottling just a few bottles is that counter pressure bottle fillers, like the Tapcooler especially, which, by the way, I keep saying counter pressure bottle filler in part because of my quote brew bottler that we sold many years ago. The Tapcooler is way more convenient than even that. It just costs $90. My thing I was selling, I think, for $8 a piece or something. So, and all it is tubing, a bung, and whatever attachment you need for the faucet that you're using, all of which I probably still have parts laying around somewhere. And then a stainless steel tube. And it's very, very, very rudimentary. The Tapcooler, way more convenient than that. You just have to pay for it. So, again, I get what Minbar is saying. I do feel like it's more convenient, but I also hear what you're saying, Jordan, that if you're filling 15 or more bottles, it's going to be way more convenient just to go through the hassle of setting up the BeerGun. And again, $120. I mean, honestly, I know that sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money to some people, but if you're competing, that is a small price to pay to ensure that that beer is bottled in the best way possible. So I'm a fan of it. The next reader comment comes from Stephen Ousts, who says, I performed this triangle test last year using a fresh hop hazy IPA and served samples to my homebrew club. I let the bottle sit in my garage for a couple of weeks before the test to allow for more potential oxidation. The results were not significant as well. My preference is the Tapcooler because it's less work to set up, clean, and I get far less foaming. Again, all things that we've discussed previously.
Yeah, and I do think the foaming is a function of the carbonation level, because when you have a really highly carbed one, as soon as you break that seal, a bunch of foam is created. So, different devices for different needs, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that we have these options available to us and they're still both out there, given where we're at in the industry right now, I think is awesome. The thoughtfulness that goes into creating these, really convenient tools for homebrewers or for brewers in general is just so awesome. And, if you are having struggles with packaging beer off of your tap, know that these are out there. You could probably find them used right now for a much better deal. Just look for it. I know that I've seen Blichmann beer guns come up on my local, and I live in small town Fresno here. My local marketplace and Craigslist, I've seen beer guns come up for $50, $60. I mean, come on. That is a killer deal. Yeah, you're going to want to replace the tubing, maybe even replace the disconnects if you're a nut like me. But they're just so convenient. Do you have any final words on the Tapcooler and the BeerGun before we wrap this one up?
I saw a Reddit thread recently about some concerns that maybe Blichmann was having some financial troubles. Apparently that they've not been answering emails.
Shit.
Yeah. And apparently they haven't been fulfilling orders for homebrew shops that are making orders, and the staff there have been kind of ghosting them. So they have been an incredible supplier to our hobby, and I really hope that they aren't going under with the tough financial times that are happening right now. Maybe everyone's on vacation and maybe it's all good, but I just want to say, Blichmann, we love you, and we really hope that you can survive the financial storm that's happening in brewing right now, because these are incredible products and they will last a lifetime. So the Tapcooler is another great option as well, and they seem to be doing great with their product. I think they're actually maybe from Europe, but really hope that Blichmann can survive the storm, because they make some great products.
Well, I did not realize we were going to go down this rabbit hole, but I feel like it is necessary. Now, that is the first I'd heard of anything like that. So while you were sharing that very seemingly troubling information, I looked into it, and I just discovered that Blichmann Engineering was acquired by More Beer.
What?
Yeah, More
When did that
Flavor
happen?
Inc. It says within the last couple of weeks. I'm I don't know if this is AI or not, but it says that if you've noticed communication gaps, ghosted customer support tickets, okay, this sounds like AI, or major inventory shortages recently, that explains the rumors floating around the homebrew forums. The company has officially been acquired. It was the acquisition. More Flavor, which is the parent of More Beer and Brewmaster Wholesale, has officially acquired both the Blichmann Engineering and Anvil Brewing Equipment brands and product lines. The gear is not disappearing. The product lines are staying alive. More Flavor is currently taking over supply chain and manufacturing pipelines to restock inventory to favorite pieces of gear, accessories, and hard to find spare parts should be hitting the shelves again soon. Customer support will be shifting to More Flavor, so it makes sense, right? That these people are complaining about not hearing back, because there's going to be kind of that period of time where they're switching over. That makes sense to me. So the brands are sticking around. They're just settling into their new corporate home. If you're looking for parts or trying to track down, this comes from More Beer, I believe, trying to track down, back-ordered gear, you'll want to head over to More Beer to check on their transition timelines. Wouldn't you know it? I had no clue that was happening. So, thanks for sharing that with me, Jordan. Now I'm curious what your thoughts are on this acquisition.
I think this is kind of a happy ending, right?
Yeah.
They weren't bought by private equity or, some random, big beer company or Chinese company. And More Beer obviously is in the business and of keeping the community thriving. And so I think this is a great new home for them. And I'm so happy to hear that the brand's not just going to die and that you have good stewards like the folks at More Beer to take care of it.
Hell yeah. Couldn't agree more. And on that, we will end this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Brülosophy Show over on YouTube. And as always, you can read more about the experiment that we discussed by clicking the link to the article on Brülosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.